So I guess what I mean is I only got like 3 slides out of this. Now that's obviously not going to cover all the possibilities. It's not working for me. There we go. But it's all just kind of logical, I think. So how many pages was this? It's a pretty long section, you know, it's 67-ish pages. But as far as navigating through their exam, it really kind of comes down to just these little terms that they put on you, like upcoding and rent a patient. And Stark law is something you'll hear. You may have never heard about this, but I had never really heard of the Stark law before I started doing this class. And since then, it's come up in conversation outside of class 2 or 3 different times. I don't know, it's funny how that happens. But so anyway, healthcare fraud, we are having people trying to defraud healthcare benefits of some sort. So unbundling, also known as fragmentation, these are just some of the schemes that kind of show up in this area of fraud. So you've got providers, and by providers we're talking about medical personnel or suppliers or things like that, hospital entities, things like that. Providers are attempting to increase their profits by unbundling this single procedure into smaller pieces. So that's a type of fraud. And I'm sure they give examples. You know, I'm getting out of my element here with all the healthcare stuff, but so I can't just say, you know, like when they would do this, because I got no example to rely on for that. But I think it makes sense, you know. So upcoding, pretty descriptive of what's going on, right? Bill for a higher level of service than it's actually rendered. Seems like I saw an example of a cut being upgraded to laceration or something like that. I don't know. Rent a patient, kind of an odd term, but it is the term. You are paying people to come and do all this medical testing and procedures that they really don't need. Kind of giving them a cut of it, you know, maybe your buddy and you're a doctor or something. It's like, hey, come on in, we'll run a bunch of tests and I'll bill your insurance and I'll give you half of it or something like that. Yeah, obvious things. Stark law. So Stark law is the physician self-referral law. So that law is in place so that a doctor can't figure out a way to refer patients to him or herself. Or somehow profit from their own referrals. So that is the Stark law. And then I just kind of said, you know, I don't know what to put into these slides. It seems like I might have gotten lazy, but I didn't get lazy. There's a whole bunch of stuff in here. A lot of it's law, and I didn't want to tell it twice because it's all the law stuff's going to show up in the law sections. Put it a little random. This could show up line on here. They referred to, and this is a term I didn't know before, a capper. A capper is somebody who's out there recruiting people to participate in these schemes. That could show up. Skip the law section for, you know, skip the law stuff until you take law. You'll see it all again, probably in better detail. But I made a note of the laws that did show up here. So as I am preparing for this actual section, I can go back and kind of review what I learned about these different laws that show up in a better detail later. Patient Protection Affordable Care Act, HIPAA. HIPAA's a big one. Medicare and Medicaid, anti-kickback, Stark law we just kind of briefly mentioned, false statements. You don't have to study that to know what that is. It's making a false statement, right? Criminal false claims, civil false claims. Better in the law section. So other than that, you know, look at your review questions and kind of see what they zero in on. I'm pretty sure a lot of these terms will show up, upcoding, bundling, and that kind of thing, rent a patient, and probably some of these other random things. that I can't find anymore. And, you know, they mentioned things about, I think this was in this section. It's all running together in my head. There's so much material here, but they mentioned how like psychiatric hospitals and nursing homes are very susceptible to fraudulent activity for a number of probably obvious reasons, right? You've got people there who are more easily taken advantage of, you know, elderly people. They're not in charge of their own finances, and you know, it's kind of an area that could be abused. You know, questions like that could show up as well. Some of these oddball things here, like a rolling lab, they mention. A rolling lab is just like what it sounds like. It's a mobile, you know, it's a traveling, I don't know how to word it, but laboratory, I guess, and it's the name of it, a rolling lab. They go around and we get these people in here to do some health screening, and it's free, but they end up charging their insurance without telling them, and then they don't give them their test results and just move along. You know, it's a rolling lab. It's evidently a fraud that's out there. And then other things that are more general in term, like provider fraud. You know, that's the provider committing some kind of fraud. Providers being, like we said, the doctors or the hospitals or suppliers or things like that. You know, and then they would do things such as upcoding and unbundling and that kind of thing to accomplish these things. Fictitious services, it kind of describes what it is, right? And I think we're to the point where we have a feel for just seeing the title and knowing kind of what's going on. Fictitious services are going to involve some kind of services that are not right. You know, they don't exist. They're fake services. So if you had a question, you know, which of the following is an example of a fictitious service, you would find the example that involves some kind of service that's fake, right? You know, never happened. Let's see what else. You know, that's the big things I pulled out of here. It's a very specific little chapter, and it's definitely worth skimming through it just to see what all they touch on and pay attention to your review questions. Oh, DRG creep is another one you might take a note of. I wouldn't worry about memorizing what DRG stands for. It stands for diagnostic related groupings. This is kind of like upcoding, but it's kind of a pattern of upcoding in a way. DRG creep, you know, they're manipulating all these codes and procedures and kind of a repetitive pattern of doing it. So that might be worth taking a note of. Let's see. Of course, kickbacks can occur in any setting. I mentioned that. There's a lot of pages here. To me, just not a whole lot of meat. So I think we can move on from there unless y'all have any comments about anything or questions about anything. All right, this one was a little more fun to read, you know, because we're all consumers. And we are consumers every day. It's not as exciting to read about healthcare and all that, but some of this stuff is kind of interesting. So consumer fraud could involve a lot of different things. Selling junky product, overcharging, performing unnecessary work, incompetence, you know, specific things like rolling back the odometer on a car you're trying to sell, you know, all kinds of possibilities. The advanced fee swindle. So you are saying you're going to deliver a product or a service, and then you collect the money, the advance fee, and never deliver, shut down and get out of town, right? So still very descriptive of what the fraud is, kind of like a lot of these, most of these things that we talk about. Debt consolidation scheme, it's a very specific name for a very specific thing. You're getting money from somebody who's already having trouble with debt, and you're just going to get them in worse shape to your advantage, which just plain a little dirty, right? But There's a lot of variations on this, but it involves getting money from them, telling them you're going to do something, not doing a thing for them, taking the money and leaving, right? Directory advertising, sale of advertising to a magazine or directory that does not exist. Diploma mill, purchase a diploma from you. Of course, your school is not accredited. That kind of thing. You really start hating humanity when you read some of this thing, seeing what people do to each other. Talking about using kids to their advantage. There's one where they're sending school-age kids door to door to collect money for a charity that doesn't exist. It's like, oh my goodness, it just makes you so mad. Modeling schools, you appeal to the people's vanity. You target parents and grandparents. Oh, your daughter's beautiful. Let's get her set up to do modeling. I know so-and-so. I have these connections. And of course, grandparents and parents are like, oh, I know. That's so awesome. Let's do this. Using words like cancer in the title of a quote-unquote nonprofit organization, a fake one, to make it sound legitimate. Home-based businesses. We see these types of things advertised all the time in newspapers and little signs stuck all over town. Work from home, earn up to this per month. And you're like, yeah, right. So type of scheme there might be, buy these materials from us, do the work with them, stuff these envelopes or assemble them. We'll buy them back from you. But they never do, right? That kind of thing. This one, this one's dirty. But you got to admire their cleverness, though. Revenge scheme, also known as a scavenger scheme. I'd take note of both of those terms. I figure either of them could equally show up if they did test on this one. So you con them the first time. Use a company, a fake company or something. So you take money from them. And then you go back to them as somebody else saying, did you get taken advantage of by whatever company? Well, a lot of other people did, and we're all going to go after them. And you're like, yes, let's get them. So it's like, all right, well, let's chip in and we'll get the investigation going. And then you hit them twice. So scavenger. And then very, very dirty, this next one. Somebody dies, and then you start trying to use the loved ones who were left behind, using the death to kind of capitalize on that. Hey, so-and-so ordered this and I'm delivering it, and it was this amount of dollars and they'll pay it, and that kind of thing. So it's just wrong, so wrong. All right, but I would venture to say that you'll get more questions from these last three slides than anywhere. Ponzi schemes, pyramid schemes. And there's not a whole lot to kind of take in on this as far as navigating through this exam. Know what each is and know the difference between the two. So a Ponzi scheme, and read carefully as you take these questions, because Ponzi pyramid, they sound really close, and they are very close. So make sure you know what the question's asking. Are they talking Ponzi? Are they talking pyramid? There are different things. So a Ponzi scheme, straight up illegal, right? There's no other way about that. It's an illegal business. Now, what it does is similar to a pyramid. So, they do make their money off of new investors. All right, so they get new investors to pay money in. That money just goes to the earlier investor. So the only people making money in a Ponzi scheme are the early first investors. All right. What makes this absolutely 100% illegal is there is no commercial activity, or maybe just a little bitty bit. It's just flat out fraud. And, they kind of keep them on the hook a little bit. They might give little miniature payoffs. Here's a little bit of return. It's going to get better, just to kind of keep them there, But what they're distributing is not profits at all. It's just a little bit of a return on what's already been invested. That is a Ponzi scheme in a very small nutshell. It's enough to get you by on this. an illegal pyramid. So a pyramid in and of itself is not illegal. There are companies that are legitimate that use a pyramid structure. An illegal pyramid generates revenue by recruiting new members over and over and over. All right. If their number one focus is, and the way they're pulling revenue in is just on new members, that makes it an illegal pyramid. A legal pyramid would have some economic substance in there. And a few bullet points down, it says the courts often apply a 70% rule, which requires at least 70% of profits come from something that's actually going on besides recruiting new members. All right. So they could offer merchandise, some kind of services, and yeah, all that stuff I just mentioned. Actually, it becomes illegal when recruiting new members is the focus. And y'all probably heard the stories, you know, how a pyramid can't sustain itself for long at all. This false logic about how everybody has friends and associates. You sign up 3 or 4 people below you and you're good to go, but they've shown mathematically how it's destined to fail. No matter what, there's not enough players, not enough people to keep even a very small pyramid up and running. So this last slide kind of gives you what's the difference in the two. And our materials make the point that the difference is how it's promoted. An illegal pyramid, they're promoted as pyramids. You know, they don't hide and say, you know, this is not what we're doing. They promote themselves with levels and stages, and you know, the way for you to get up in the company is to recruit new members. Ponzi schemes, you got some kind of investment opportunity, you know, minerals or some speculative thing. That's what they believe they're buying. They believe they're buying an investment in these types of things. You know, there's no suggestion of moving into another level or anything. It's just, hey, get in on this investment opportunity. But they both have similarities. They're both using new investor money to make payoffs. They're just run differently, and they're prosecuted under different laws, which is not our focus yet. But those 3 slides are enough to get you through any question I think they'll put on you, though. You probably wouldn't need to go beyond that. That ends us on consumer fraud. Now, we could talk and talk and talk about Ponzi schemes and pyramid schemes, but I guess our focus in here is to get the CFE exam knocked out, and that's enough to get it done. Comments, questions? All right, that's it for consumer fraud. There's more, of course, in there. I'm kind of starting to focus more on just here's what you definitely need to know, but there's a lot of interesting things in here, very specific things that they'll just mention over and over and over, all with descriptive names to the scheme anyway. Bait and switch, I didn't bother mentioning. I think y'all have heard of bait and switch over and over. But there's, you know, here's a scheme called take the money and run scheme. I think we can probably guess what that might be, right? A sweetheart or friendship scheme. You know, there's so many things here, so we can't talk about them all. Grandparent scheme. You know, just even reading the title of that makes me mad. You know, preying on these older people. Okay. Very well. All right, let's move on. Computer and internet fraud. Kind of the same story, but I find this section to be easier than the other two, particularly the health care fraud one, because this is all stuff we're kind of familiar with on a daily basis. There's about 70 pages of content here. It's repetitive of stuff we've already talked about in some of the identity theft chapters and things like that. All those little cutesy terms show up again, like vishing and fishing and smishing and farming and spear fishing and rock fishing and all that stuff we've already looked at. They talk about things like what's a firewall. You know, these are things we know. So computer crime, computer fraud is simply using a computer or something like that to commit fraud. Most states define it as an attempt crime, and that allows the government to punish it even if they didn't succeed in the crime itself. And as we get into the law section, you'll see some things that are opposite of that. You know, it's like it had to have worked for there to be a crime type thing. This didn't even have to work. As long as they tried it, they're in trouble. We know what hacking is. There are a lot of little, there's some interesting stuff, but we can't put it all in here. But hacking is using technology to gain unauthorized access to information. A black hat hacker is a bad deal. You know, they're in there trying to cause trouble. They also made a comment that there's a white hat hacker, where they are well-intentioned and they're trying to get in so they can say, all right, I got in right here, fix it. You know, so they're trying to look for weaknesses before somebody who's trying to abuse them gets in there. Comments made the most direct way to access a computer is to use someone else's password. I can see that as being a multiple choice type question, so I stuck it in there. Password cracking, you know, again, it's like, all right, why am I even typing this in here? But that's kind of the way I feel with the last 3 sessions. All right, password cracking. What in the world could that be? Trying to figure out what somebody's password is, right? Trapdoors, spoofing. We know what those things are from TV shows and movies. Trapdoors, a secret entry point. Spoofing, you're masquerading as somebody to get in there. Salami technique, I stuck it in there because it's from one of my favorite movies in the world. All right, y'all are gonna have to impress me here. So the salami technique, this is the name of this. It's a type of fraud where a person steals a ton of money, a substantial amount of money, by slicing off thin amounts of cash repeatedly over time. What movie was that a focus of? Y'all don't know. Somebody's about to chime in here from the internet. Somebody make me proud. Where's my chat box? Yes, Office Space. Awesome. Bonus points. Have y'all seen Office Space? No. They do beat a printer with a bat. Somebody told me to watch that one. You've got to watch it. Yeah, it's great. So in Office Space, I mean, it's a bunch of nonsense. The whole movie is. It's really, really great. You've probably heard people quote it without realizing what it's from, and you've probably seen the little internet memes and stuff too. They figured out a way to funnel fractions of cents into their own account, and they're like, you know, we can get a little bit of money there. And then they, you know, after a little short amount of time, they found out that they had stolen way more than they thought, and they're like, there's no way we're not going to get caught. And then it's just a bunch of craziness and nonsense, but it's really good, and I guarantee you've heard people refer to it and may not have realized it. But yeah, that's a salami technique. You're slicing off small amounts and over and over and over over time. Okay. Worms, Trojan horse, spyware, y'all know these things, right? You know, a worm is a self-replicating program. It's not like a, you know, it's different than a virus. It doesn't need to be part of another program to propagate itself. It can spread by itself through emails and things like that. Trojan horse, y'all are familiar with the original story, so based on that, you could probably determine what a Trojan horse is. It gives the appearance of being useful, a program, a command, something like that, but there's some kind of malicious code that causes damage. Spyware, we know, right? So this whole chapter is just a whole bunch of, oh yeah, we know this. So again, I didn't end up with many slides on this one. Ransomware, y'all are probably definitely familiar with that, right? That's becoming more and more prevalent. So they take your system hostage, and Grey's Anatomy, they did it, right? You always, TV.
Yeah, I'm not missing Grey's Anatomy.
You can watch it later. It'll be all right. See, TV and movies are useful. You learn stuff. You know, don't let. All right. So yeah, more of the same with computer stuff. Stuff you already know. You know, if you're behind on your reading or studying, that's a good one to skip because it's stuff you kind of already know daily life, in my opinion. All right, contract and procurement fraud. We start getting a little bit more toward the law stuff. Contracts. Y'all learned all this in business law, but here it is again. Y'all know what a contract is. It's an oral or written agreement. Two or more parties have some obligation to each other, right? To be enforceable, all of this has to be present. You'll probably remember this from business law. There has to be some kind of lawful subject matter. It can't be something that's against the law. There have to be parties that are competent. They have the legal capacity to make decisions. It can't be a minor, right? It has to be somebody of lawful age. They have to be, they have to have intent to be legally bound. I always remember the example in the textbook I remember from law was somebody like, I'd give my right arm to do this. There's no intent to really give your right arm, right? So there has to be an agreement, an offer and acceptance. There has to be some kind of legal consideration. There has to be an exchange of something of value for it to be a legal contract. And it has to be a form permitted by law. There are some contracts that have to be in writing, that kind of thing. But this is all about procurement and things like that. So, so there's typically open and free competition, but some organizations often procure goods and services through competitive bidding or negotiating. Competitive bidding has a good purpose, right? Governments, I used to do a lot of government audits. They were required to competitively bid if the amount was larger, above a certain amount. They were required to get quotes if it was kind of not quite as large. That just kind of keeps, it does a lot of good things actually, but we're all about fraud here. People can abuse that system to their own gain. So there can be, for example, collusion among the people. There's competitive bids. People are often required to competitively bid things out. Well, the competitive people can get together and work this to their advantage. This first scheme had a bunch of different names: complementary bidding, protective bidding, shadow bidding, cover bidding. So again, with all these, the bidder, the contractors, the competitors, they're working together. So most of them are going to submit what they call a token bid. It's not quite high enough, not serious attempts to win the contract, but you're giving the appearance of competitive bidding. And it'd be just like, all right, it's your turn to win one. You can jack up the price above what it needs to be. And everybody benefits except whoever's paying, right? The government or whoever else. So they're defrauding them. Bid rotation, so they alternate business between or among themselves. They're like, all right, my turn, your turn, my turn, your turn. Again, they can work together and get higher prices. Bid suppression, they're agreeing at least one of the conspirators doesn't bid or withdraws a previously submitted bid. Again, trying to ensure that the other person gets the bid. It's all kind of the same end game here, right? Market division, market allocation. So they agree, the competitors do, to allocate markets and not compete in each other's areas. So all kind of the same thing. It's all collusion among contractors. Collusion between the contractors and the employees who are, going to pay for these things. So they can collude and work together to each of their benefits and to the detriment of whatever company's trying to buy these things. Need recognition scheme. So the employee of the company convinces their employer that it needs this product when they really don't, or it's way too much. It's an excessive product or excessive service. And then there's usually a kickback to the employee. There's bid tailoring. The employee and the contractor are working together on this one too. They draft bid specifications in a way that gives somebody an unfair advantage, to accommodate somebody's capability. They're like, all right, I know you have this ability over them, so let's make sure and specify that this needs to happen, right? So they tailor the bid to someone's advantage. Or just good old-fashioned leaking data. Hey, here's the deal. This person bid that. That person bid this. You need to get above it, right? Bid splitting. So if amounts are large, they split up a large project into small projects, and then they're not required to bid it at all. And then the employee and the contractor can work together to put that price, overall higher than it needs to be. Negotiated contracts, there's fraud that can take place there. Good old-fashioned just fake cost data, pricing data, inflate the cost. Just gradually pulling a little law in here that you'll see in greater detail later. The Truth in Negotiations Act is going to protect the government from unscrupulous contractors. So hits them with heavy penalties and things. So it protects the government from contractors who inflate their costs by falsifying cost proposals, and it has a lot of requirements to hopefully avoid that type of thing. Of course, data has to be submitted before negotiations. Contractor has to officially certify the data. And then if they do it wrong, then they're in extra trouble. All right, so there's that one in a nutshell. Kind of a lot to look at, not a whole lot to talk about on these, and I